Hello, everyone. Welcome to Medicine and Miracles. I'm your host, Dr. Scott McMahon. I've been a board certified pediatrician for over 30 years, and I've specialized in the diagnosis and treatment of CIRS for nearly 15 years. CIRS is short for Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. It's a mystery illness to many doctors, and it can affect any part of your body. I've evaluated 2,000 patients, published 10 articles, co-written a CIRS medical textbook, given 50 presentations at medical meetings, and testified as an expert in 10 states and 2 other countries. But I'm also a man of faith, and I've followed Jesus for over 30 years. I'm an ordained minister. I've pastored a church. I've written a book on spiritual warfare, and I've been on 15 international mission trips where I was either for medical or preaching or both. So this is Medicine and Miracles. And we're going to talk some about medicine and science, but we're also going to talk about faith and some of the miracles that I've seen over the years. Some people think that medicine and faith are incompatible subjects, but I'm going to show you that this thinking is not true. Medicine, miracles, medicine and miracle. It's going to be great. So let's dive in. So today we're going to discuss what a multisystem illness is. CIRS is a multisystem illness. And to understand that, let's talk about what doctors mean when they refer to system of your body. I'm going to give you some extended examples here to make it kind of crystal clear. Most people with CIRS have chronic fatigue. Now, that doesn't mean you're tired because you just went to the gym and worked out. And that doesn't mean you're tired because you stayed up all night and you worked a double shift. Now, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about tired all the time or almost all the time. Now, you may feel okay first thing in the morning, but people with chronic fatigue are usually exhausted by the time they get off work. And that's most days. Or some people will have some good days and they'll have some bad days, but on their bad days, they are tired all the time. Now, as time goes on, if you have CIRS, this progresses until you feel tired every day. And you're tired when you wake up and you're tired when you go to sleep. And you might even be taking 1 or 2 naps or even more every day. You might also be prioritizing tasks. And many CIRS patients have to choose between washing their hair or going to the store to get groceries or vacuuming the house. Now, for me, I could do all 3 of those in a day. But for them, they can only choose one. If they do even 2 or try to do all 3, they're going to be in bed all day the next day because they're so tired. Now, if you have fatigue like any of those examples, you might have CIRS and you might want to go see a doctor. Now, switching gears, many people with CIRS also have stomach issues. They have bloating, gassiness, lots of flatulence, also known as farting. That's the way my kids say it. Anyway, others actually have pains in their belly. They may have frequent nausea with or without vomiting. Sometimes these pains or the nausea will restrict how much you eat or even what you eat. Others will have diarrhea that can occur every time they go to the bathroom or at least a couple times a month. Now, if you have stomach issues like any of these examples, you might have CIRS. Once again, you should go see a doctor. Now, switching systems one more time, many people with CIRS urinate too often. Well, do you know how often you should be urinating? Most people don't. But assuming that you're toilet trained, potty trained, like when you were 2 or 3 years old, assuming that you are toilet trained, most people go 3 to 4 times a day. And none at night until you hit about 45 years, and then once at night. But people with CIRS sometimes go 10 or 20 times a day. And sometimes they go 5 or 6 times at night. Really hard to get a good night's sleep when you're getting up 5 times to go to the bathroom. Now, about 9 out of 10 CIRS patients urinate too often during the day or at night or both. Now, all of my patients who pee too often tell me they do so because they drink too much. In reality, though, the problem is that they are missing a chemical called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. They don't make enough of it. And because of that, they make too much urine. And so they pee and pee and pee. And as a result of that, they get a little bit dehydrated and they get thirsty. So then they drink and drink and drink. And when that urine hits their kidney, because they don't have enough of that chemical, they pee and pee and pee. So they end up drinking too much because they're peeing too much, not peeing too much because they're drinking too much. Isn't that clever? Anyway, got to make that chemical or you're just going to pee all the time. So these three examples that I just showed you about people who have CIRS, and that they tend to be tired, they tend to have stomach issues, and they tend to urinate a lot. That defines three different functional areas of their body that they have problems in. Or another way of saying it is that three different systems of the body, or three different body systems. You see, doctors trained in Western medicine, like myself, are taught to view these functional areas separately. This is called the systems approach to medicine. So this approach helps one specialize. For instance, pulmonologists become expert at diseases of the lungs, and cardiologists become experts at diseases of the heart. But many doctors, when confronted with a patient with fatigue and stomach issues and frequent urination, will think that there might be several different illnesses going on, one in each system. But CIRS is one illness causing problems in all three of those different body systems. Now, some of the systems of the body are pretty obvious. Breathing is a part of the respiratory system, and it includes the mouth, the mouth, the nose, the lungs, and everything related to breathing. The heart and all the blood vessels in your body, the heart pumps that blood through the body, through those vessels, and that's called the circulatory system. The process of making urine through the kidneys and collecting it in the bladder and the several tubes that are needed to transport the urine is part of the genitourinary system. Another part of the genitourinary system looks at the reproductive organs themselves, like testicles in men or ovaries in the uterus in women. Now, if you're just looking at those organs, we call it the reproductive system. But if you're looking at the entire system, it's the genitourinary system. There are different ways you can classify these. Eating food, digesting it, absorbing the nutrients, and removing the waste products, pooping, is called the gastrointestinal system. And this includes the mouth, the esophagus, your stomach, intestines, all the way down to the rectum. And there are at least a dozen different systems, and there could be many more depending on how you choose to classify those systems. Another system is called the general system, or the constitutional system. Fatigue, headaches, sleep problems fall into that system. And once again, in Western medicine, doctors tend to specialize in one system or the other. Cardiologists specialize in the heart and circulatory system. Neurologists specialize in the brain and nervous system. Rheumatologists specialize in diseases that cause autoimmunity, or literally antibodies that attack the person that made them instead of bad things that come into your body. Pulmonologists specialize in the respiratory system. Endocrinologists focus on the glands and various hormone systems. Ophthalmologists specialize in the eyes. Internal medicine doctors specialize in all adults, but they generalize by reviewing all of the adult system. Pediatricians specialize in children, but they also review all the systems of children. And last but not least, family practitioners are the most generalized, seeing children and adults and looking at all of their systems. There are many other specializations and even subspecializations where you break a specialization down into different parts. The good way to remember it is that the specialists become expert at narrow areas of medicine, while the generalists focus more on all the symptoms. All of the systems, but they have less expertise in any given system. So remember, experts in a narrow field may not be able to see the forest for the trees. And CIRS is definitely a forest illness. Now, CIRS can affect every single system of the body. Adult patients with CIRS will have problems in at least 4 of their different body systems. Children may start, particularly when they're young, 5, 6, or less, may start with a single system. But by the time they're 11, they usually will have at least 4 systems involved too. Now, if your doctor, is not aware of CIRS, you're likely to get misdiagnosed with several different illnesses that you don't have to try and explain the symptoms that you do have. Therefore, if you have problems in many different body systems and you're not getting helpful treatment from your doctor, you might want to find a doctor who's familiar with CIRS and get evaluated by that person. And of course, you can find lots of free videos about treatment and symptoms and all sorts of things at www.cirsx.com, at CIRSX.com, and a list of trained professionals who treat CIRS at www.survivingmold.com. Well, that's systems-based medicine and multisystem illness. The body in itself is a miracle, but let's talk about a miracle that I've actually experienced. Now, in May of 1997, I was going to go to a Promise Keepers event in Houston, Texas. Now, this was a very popular men's Christian gathering in the 90s. I think that they're still around. They emphasized the love of Jesus and getting men involved, and also in ending racism. And I was going to go to Houston and take my brother-in-law, who lived around Houston, because this particular event was at the Astrodome. Now, the trip for me was about 700 miles, and I was going to drive to my brother-in-law's house. But I got this crazy idea a couple days before I left that I was going to let God be my pilot, not my co-pilot, but the guy in charge. And I told the Lord he could direct my every step, my path the entire way, where I stopped, when I took a break, what I listened to as far as music, even what speed I would drive. I told him he would be in total charge. And I left early on a Thursday morning, and I listened to worship music most of the way. I prayed a lot. About halfway, I crossed by Ozona, Texas, and I felt like I was supposed to get gas and take a break. I got some lunch, and then I resumed my trip. I stopped in San Antonio because my wife had told me I needed to buy a suit. We were getting ready to go on a cruise in about a month. It was a big anniversary. And Roswell doesn't have, this is where I live, many suit purchasing options. So I found a Men's Warehouse. And nowadays people just get on the internet. But back then, people actually went to the stores and they bought clothes. They got fitted for them and they got alterations done at the store. So I stopped at a Men's Warehouse in San Antonio. I picked a suit, I got measured, and I left the clothing there for alterations to pick up on my way back. Now, I left the store at around 4:30 in the afternoon, and I had to traverse through several interstates and highway junctions to get out of San Antonio. Now, this usually would have been arduous because there's a massive rush hour traffic in most cities like that. However, I zoomed right through the city without as much as a single slowdown. That in itself was a miracle. But remember, this was before the days of GPS in cars or on your cell phone. In fact, most people didn't even have cell phones back then. But I was a doctor, I was on call, and so I had it. Now I was making good time, and I was east of San Antonio a few miles. I was about 3 hours from Houston. And I noticed that a car was driving up and slowing down and speeding up so he could stay next to me. And so I slowed down and sped up so that he wouldn't stay next to me because I didn't know if this was a stalker or a carjacker. And to be honest, it was a bit unnerving. And I started considering my evasive options because I didn't like the idea that I was in a big city and somebody was trying to stay right with me. And then all of a sudden, my big old brick Motorola cell phone was sitting on the passenger seat. It rang. And on the other end was the nurse that I worked with at my clinic in Roswell. And she asked me where I was. Thought that was kind of a strange question. She knew I was on my way to Houston, but she asked, and I told her I was a few miles east of San Antonio. And she told me that her oldest son, who I'd met a couple times before, but always with her, that he was in the car next. And I actually I hadn't recognized him because he was out of the usual context. I kind of laughed. We both pulled over, we chatted. He invited me to have dinner with him and his wife and his 2 kids. And I agreed and followed him to his house, called my hosts in Houston and told him I was going to be a little later than expected. It was a pretty crazy thing in a city of 2 million people to run into somebody that you know while driving. Well, anyway, my nurse's son, his family, and I, we went out to dinner. It was delicious. And while we were out, it started to rain and then pouring and then actually flash flooding, kind of like it did in Roswell this weekend. We agreed that I shouldn't drive until this major rainstorm ended. And I ended up spending the night at their home just outside of San Antonio after informing my brother-in-law. It rained hard, well into the wee hours of the night. Now, in the morning when I got up, clear sky. And I made this very smooth trip to Spring, which is just north of Houston, and it was effortless. And I got to my brother-in-law's house. But as I was driving and as I was listening to the radio, I became aware that there was a huge accident on Interstate 10 or I-10 the night before. And it turns out, after doing a little research, that the accident was right where I would have been driving through, right around the time I would have been driving through if I hadn't stopped for dinner outside of San Antonio. And not only that, but I found that an oil tanker had turned over and caught on fire, and they ended up closing both sides of the interstate where I was at, and they held up traffic for 5 hours. I would have been in the middle of that, sitting there doing nothing for hours, but I missed it because I spent the night 3 hours away just outside of San Antonio. So to summarize, I let God navigate my trip and be the pilot. I zoomed through San Antonio at rush hour. I met an old acquaintance on the road of a city of 2 million people. I stayed for dinner and avoided flash flooding, difficult driving, and an oil tanker turnover, which would have caused me to be stuck in traffic for 5 hours, or maybe even worse. Maybe I would have been involved in that accident. And it may not seem as miraculous as someone rising from the dead, but it still was amazing what God could do with my willingness to be obedient and trust Him for guidance. Now, a Medicine and Miracles episode would not be complete without pausing for a moment of hope. So today's uplifting thought is that some things are impossible for humans, but all things are possible with God. That comes from Luke chapter 18, verse 27. My road trip was a perfect example. Some might argue that this was a series of coincidences, starting with traveling through a major metropolitan area at rush hour and not even slowing down. And that led to meeting an old acquaintance literally on the road, which kept me out of a rainstorm and an extended traffic jam, and maybe more. With man, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible. So, are you in an impossible situation right now? I am. But guess what? That's God's specialty. He is the God of the impossible. And He has brought me through every impossible circumstance that I've ever had. And believe me, it's plenty. And if He's done it for me, He will do it for you. Because of that, I never give up hope. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. And if you liked what you saw or learned something new, hit the like and subscribe buttons. And join us again for our next episode of Medicine and miracles, where we find the mysteries of the human body intersecting with the unsearchable God. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Bye-bye.